A distant chapel bell tolls. A cold breath dissolves into the air. They say the executioner's axe is a swift mercy, reserved for those of royal blood. But when the sun has yet to rise and your name is called, it is not mercy. It is the end. To the old guard leaning against the cold stone of the Tower of London, it was just another Monday morning. He had seen kings rise and traitors fall. The sovereign's justice, he mused, had a cruel and relentless rhythm. But today was different. There was no roar from the crowds on Tower Hill, only a heavy silence within the grounds of Tower Green, the space reserved for the most private of deaths. Then he saw her. A small, dark figure, barely more than a child, walking between the towering guards. Lady Jane Grey. The February chill seeped through the black fabric of her gown, but Jane hardly felt it. Her entire world had shrunk to the crunch of her shoes on the damp gravel and the frantic drum of her own heart against her ribs. The London sky was a sheet of gray, hanging over the fortress walls like a shroud. Only a few dozen witnesses were present, their strange, impassive faces arranged to certify her fall. 9 days. The throne was mine for only 9 days. A faint memory flashed through her mind, the crushing weight of the crown as they placed it on her head, the hot tears that streamed down her face. I did not want it. I never wanted it. I was merely a pawn in the hands of ambitious men. My father-in-law. Where were they now? She ascended the makeshift scaffold. The air was thick with the smell of damp wood and fear. She looked at the executioner, a burly man with a blank face, his calloused hands gripping the axe handle. Its steel blade glinted lethally in the weak morning light. She recited her final words from her prayer book. Her voice, though trembling, carrying clearly in the silence. I am come hither to die, and by a law I am condemned to the same. Then the blindfold plunged her into darkness, a complete, absolute blackness. Her other senses surged. She could hear the wind whistling through the stonework, the sound of her own ragged breath. She fumbled with her hands, her legs shaking. Where was the block? It should be right here. Panic rose in her throat. She was just a girl of 16, lost in an eternal night. What shall I do? Where is it? Her voice broke into a desperate cry. A hand gently touched hers, guiding her trembling fingers to the rough, cold surface of the block. It was the last human contact she would ever feel. She knelt, her hair spilling down her back, and pressed her face against the cold reality. She heard a sharp intake of breath from the small crowd, and then a whoosh of displaced air. Nearly a decade earlier, on an equally cold winter morning, a similar tragedy had played out for another young queen, one perhaps even more naive. Catherine Howard, fifth wife, King Henry VIII's rose without a thorn. Unlike Jane, Catherine was not dying for a contested throne. She was dying for whispers in the corridors, for secret love letters, for a past she could not outrun. Last night, she had asked them to bring the block to her cell. A strange request, but they had complied. By flickering candlelight, she had practiced. She knelt, placed her neck on the wood, familiarizing herself with the posture of death. She would not appear weak. She was a Howard. She had been Queen of England. Now, standing on the scaffold, she was strangely calm. She wore a velvet gown with a hood, her fingers stroking the soft fabric one last time. She carried no prayer book. Her prayers had ended last night. She scanned the faces of the witnesses, not for pity, but for an ending. No final words were officially recorded, but in her mind, a name echoed Culpeper. A reckless choice, a guilty pleasure that had sealed her fate. I die a queen, a voice whispered in her head, but I would rather die the wife of Culpeper. Perhaps that was the only truth left. She knelt, needing no help, and placed her neck in the practiced position. A stillness fell over Tower Green. Even the ravens seemed to hold their breath. The axe was raised, gleaming against the gray sky. And then it fell, as swift as a thought, ending the short life of the withered rose. But before the sound of the axe, there was another silence, a heavier, more suffocating silence that existed in the deepest dungeons of the Tower of London. It was the silence of the torture chamber, where cold metal waited for flesh, and screams would be swallowed by thick stone walls. This was where Anne Askew's story was written in blood and fire. Anne was not a queen. She was a scholar, a poet, a woman of unshakable faith in an age when faith could be a death sentence. When they brought her here, they did not want her death. They wanted names. The names of other high-born ladies at court who read forbidden books, who whispered of a new faith. They bound her to the rack. The room was dark, lit by a single torch that cast grotesque, dancing shadows on the wall. She could feel the cold eyes of Lord Chancellor Wriothesley on her. She heard the creak of the wheels as they tightened the ropes. The pain was a fire, starting in her shoulders and hips, then spreading through her, tearing at every joint. She bit her lip until it bled, but no names escaped her. Instead, in her mind, she recited scripture. Her body could be broken, but her spirit could not. They failed. When they released her, her body was a shattered vessel. She could not walk, nor could she stand. But she had won. On the day of her execution, the 16th of July, 1546, they had to carry her to the stake at Smithfield in a chair. She sat there, small and broken, amidst the dry kindling. As they chained her to the post, she did not flinch. She refused a final pardon offered in exchange for recanting her faith. The flame was lit. At first, it was just heat, then the acrid smell of burning pine. The fire licked at her dress, then roared to life. A bag of gunpowder was tied to her, a brutal mercy for a quicker end. But in that final moment, engulfed in flames, it was said her face was serene, as if she were seeing something far beyond the pain and the fire. Not all, however, faced death with the quiet resolve of faith. Some faced it with rage. Margaret Pole, Countess of Salisbury, was nearly 70 years old. She had outlived kings, had seen dynasties rise and fall. The Plantagenet blood in her veins was a living reminder of an age before the Tudors, and to an increasingly paranoid Henry VIII, that was an intolerable threat. She was not tortured. She was simply kept, left to rot for 2 years until the king decided her existence was no longer acceptable. On a damp May morning, she was brought to Tower Green. She walked with her back straight, her eyes fearless. But when she saw the block and the inexperienced executioner, a trembling youth assigned a task he was not ready for contempt flared in her. They ordered her to kneel. She refused. "I am no traitor," her voice rang out, sharp as steel. The guards moved in, trying to force her down, but she fought them with astonishing strength. The execution became a chaotic, shameful struggle. The executioner, his face pale with panic, swung the axe. The first blow was clumsy, striking her shoulder and leaving a deep gash. A collective gasp of horror rose not from her, but from the witnesses. Margaret staggered, her gray dress turning crimson, but she remained standing. The executioner struck again, and again. It was not an execution. It was a butchering. The scene was so horrific that even her enemies turned away. It was not until the 11th blow that her old, defiant body finally fell. 4 women, 4 fates, executed in the same place, yet in vastly different ways. A girl who died for a crown she never wanted, another for a love she couldn't renounce, a woman for a faith she wouldn't break, and an old countess for the blood in her veins. Their whispers linger in the cold stones of the Tower of London, silent warnings about the price of power and its cruelty toward the powerless.